So tonight, y'all, I want to do the tier list for Nightmare on Elm Street. So that's kind of the main crux of it, because I want to go through this, y'all. I got some clips to show. I got some pointers to make. I want to hear from you all about who you think, what your ranking is. So I have a tier list, and the way the tier list is going to go with Nightmare on Elm Street is basically I am going from the worst of the worst to the S tier, like the God tier of the franchise. The franchise in Nightmare on Elm Street has 9 movies in it. We are including Jason versus Freddy, of course, and we are also including the remake. The remake counts. It's in the franchise. It does count. And so I wanted to go from worst to God tier best in the franchise itself, and why. So this is not a rank list of like, oh, this is number 9 because number 9 was just as good, but it's number 9. No, number 9 is like the worst of the worst, and so on and so forth. So it's like worst, very bad, so on and so up until we get to the God tier. So that's where we're going. I got some fun facts to talk about it, and we're kind of going with the overview of each one, the box office stats, you know, how it did with its budget versus how it did at the box office itself, the pros of the franchise and the cons, and pretty much, you know, talking about why I gave it the ranking that I did. And some of this may actually surprise you. I actually did a video about 3 years ago where I did a ranking when I first started on YouTube. And it's funny, I went back and watched it and I realized that my opinions have greatly changed since I did that, since like rewatching the movies and seeing the kind of criteria that I was really kind of pushing a little bit of my own bias aside and stuff. So I want to talk about that as well. And of course, I want to get all of y'all opinions. So of course, let me know what you pick and if you agree with my rankings and whatnot. And we're going to be watching some clips and stuff too as well. So are you ready to begin? Let's go. Okay. All right. So the worst, the very worst of the franchise. And I don't really think this is a surprise. I think the middle of the list might be more of a surprise and more of differences of opinion. I feel like the worst and probably some of the top ones are where a lot of us can agree, or maybe not. But the worst, my opinion of the worst, is Nightmare on Elm Street 2010. The remake. Yes, I included the remake to basically say it is the worst of the franchise. So one of the major problems, fun fact, is that they did not consult Wes Craven. When it came to this movie, they chose, for some reason, to not consult the originator of the franchise, the one who created Freddy Krueger himself, Wes Craven. They did not consult him. And one of the reasons for that is actually one of the reasons they claim, which surprised me in doing the research for it, is that the same people that created the 2010 movie were the same people that created the Friday the 13th 2009 remake / sequel. Now, it's kind of debatable whether or not the Friday the 13th 2009 one was a remake or a sequel. Now, the creators later said that was just a direct sequel, but originally when it came out, they kind of made it seem like it was a remake, right? And I would say that I think the 2009 Friday the 13th was actually really good. So, cause I'm saying this to say, I'm not one of those horror fans who absolutely hates remakes. I'm not that person. I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, they're remaking this, I absolutely hate it. I'm not that person, y'all. There have been remakes that I enjoy. I enjoyed the Friday the 13th, 2009 one. And so I was very surprised to find out the same people that did that were the people who did this movie. Because I was like, wait a minute, how could you get Friday the 13th so well, but somehow completely kind of miss the essence of Nightmare on Elm Street? But then again, I think Nightmare on Elm Street, the Freddy Krueger franchise, is not your regular slasher film. And if you don't get that, you can really mess it up. And I think that's what happened here. And so, you know, what you had was the same people who did it, and you had the remake. It told the origin story of Freddy Krueger. And so I wanted to kind of break down the clip of the trailer with this one. Just bits and pieces, because we don't want no strikes here.
Kruger! Come on out, you sick bastard! You open this door, Kruger! What do you think I did? I didn't do anything!
So this is kind of the origin, right? This is how it all started. He got his sweater on. And I could dig that. I was fine with this part. But this is where we go wrong. Why you got Michael Bay doing this film? Now, I don't got no issues with Michael Bay, but we all know the type of movies he do. We really think he can produce a Nightmare on Elm Street film? Like, I mean, that was one of the sins of this thing. I'm just being honest here. So that was one of the aspects of it. And just to show a few other, we got the little girls. We got the horribly cast Nancy, because we're going to talk about that. The atmosphere.
Don't fall asleep.
I feel like, this is a great trailer. I mean, if I didn't know Freddie, and if I was someone just coming to it, I'd probably be like, oh, this looks like it's going to be a cool horror picture, in a way. And so it wasn't horrible. This is the thing. It wasn't horrible as a movie per se. It was just the worst Freddy Krueger film. So basically what you had was a lot of special effects, a lot of CGI. And to me, that can work or that can't work, right? Now, CGI can work in some of the dream scenes, because if you can create a really chilling thing, that can work. But the problem was the CGI was, just by this poster alone, you can tell. They did the CGI. It was total CGI on his face because they had said they wanted to make it very more akin to burn victims. And it's kind of like, why not do, like others are saying, the prosthetic? Why not do the actual physicality of it as opposed to CGI? And it was like, if you wanted to look real, why not make it tangible, actually real? And to me, the one of the biggest cons was the look of Freddy. To me, I just didn't find him menacing. And I don't know if it was because of the way they did the structure of his face or what, but it just really didn't work, which was interesting because I can't put my finger on, aside from the fact that it didn't have practical effects and they did CGI, how much different he looked from Robert Englund's Freddy. There wasn't that big of a difference, but there was just something about this one that did not work. And it just didn't add to the menacing aspect. Now, to speak on the box office, which is probably one of the travesties of this. Although I think it is the worst of the franchise, it actually made $117 million, which made it the highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street movie to date. Now, what does that say, right? Why did it make that much money is the question, right? Why and how did it make that much money? I would argue because I went to go see it. I went to the theater to see that movie. I'll admit that. Why? Because I had hope. We hadn't gotten a Nightmare on Elm Street movie in a minute since Freddy versus Jason, and the trailer sucked me in because, one, they didn't show the guy's face that much, probably why they didn't, and it sucked me in thinking maybe, and it just fell flat. So I think a lot of the money that it made was the initial nostalgia of people being really hyped that there was another Freddy movie coming out. So, okay, let's talk about some of the pros. The one pro was the dream effects. That was about it for me. The dream effects. Because of that, that's the one aspect where having a little bit bigger of a budget came through for them. Because I do think the dreamscapes and stuff and some of the things they were able to do with the bodies played off really well. But then from there, it just gets worse, right? Probably the greatest travesty of this wasn't even necessarily Freddy's face, but the fact that Nancy was in my opinion, a bad miscast. You know, no shade to the actress who played the Nancy in this one, but that was not Nancy. You know, Nancy, the character, Heather Langenkamp, iconic, is probably one of the best final girls. I'm not going to say she's the best ever, but she's one of the top final girls. And there's a certain reason for that. Not anything, you know, of like about looks or anything like that. Although, you know, she's a nice looking woman, but it was the essence. It was the spirit of Nancy and how she held her friends together. That was the thing about Nancy in the original. She wasn't necessarily a stereotypical rainbows and sunshine, I'm just super innocent final girl, but she had a certain thing about her. And that just really lacked with this Nancy. This Nancy lacked that charisma. And when you have it so this is supposed to be the person that goes against the main villain and they can't capture you, well, you've lost the battle to capture the audience, in my opinion. So that was a big thing for me. I think the biggest travesty was that I could not stand the Nancy in this movie because I just thought, why go this route? Now, I get it. The 2000s were kind of, everyone was trying to be a little bit more edgy and dark and stuff like that with characters. So, and that was the thing about a lot of the characters in this movie as well. They didn't really grab you, to be honest. And what was also alluded to, as others have said, was Freddy's origin story. This was talked about when it came to the film, and one of the things they definitely decided was that they were going to push the thing with the kids. Originally, now fun fact, or not so fun fact, originally that's what Wes Craven had in mind as well. So it's not like, oh my gosh, how could you do that? Where'd you get that from? Wes Craven had originally had the same idea for what Freddy would do to the kids. But they decided to back off of that and make it so that it was just the killing, right? And for good reason. You know, if you're going to have a franchise, and this is probably also why, and I'll talk about it a little bit later when it comes to Wes Craven and his ideas for the franchise, but, you know, when you have a situation like this with this character, and you're having a franchise and you want it to be fun or not so fun, like I get it. You wanted a dark, twisted horror film, and that's completely fine. But there are lines, y'all. There are lines, because I don't care how sinister someone is or villain someone is when it comes to movie magic. There's just certain things people aren't going to get in on, you know, because they didn't make him so he did a lot of one-lining quips as much in this remake, but he did do a few. But I couldn't even get on board with his quips because they were explicitly making it so he was a P. You know what I mean? He was you know, with the kids. And I was just like, I can't even enjoy this character. I can't enjoy Freddy. And when you have it so the franchise makes it so you kind of enjoy Freddy. Like, look, I have a picture of Freddy on my wall, y'all. I think I can show y'all. I don't know. I have a picture of Freddy on my wall. Do you think I'd feel comfortable having a picture of Freddy on my wall if it was so explicit of what that was? I feel kind of weird, to be honest with you. I've got a magnet. I've got another magnet out in the kitchen. I wouldn't do that if that was a 2010 version, guy. Not at all. 2010 was what I considered to be the worst of the worst. And now I'm going to tell you which one I thought was very bad. The very bad is 2003 Freddy versus Jason. For a number of reasons. It's a great idea, but not a great execution. Yes, I said it. I know, guys. I know. Let me explain myself though. Okay. I thought this was such a great idea. I thought Freddy versus Jason was a great idea. I had been waiting for it since Jason Goes to Hell. When Freddy comes out and takes the mask, when Jason finally comes over to New Line Cinema so they could do the crossover. I thought it was so awesome, the idea of this. But I feel like it failed to execute what it could have done for a number of reasons. Fun fact, though. This movie was originally supposed to have Pinhead in it, y'all, from Hellraiser. Did you know that? I thought that was a very interesting fact, that we might have had Jason versus Freddy with an appearance from Pinhead from Hellraiser. That's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty cool. I'm just saying. I don't know how that would have worked. But then again, how did this work, if we're being honest, right? How did Freddy versus Jason work? So we have the overview of what this is, right? The overview is essentially Freddy has been stuck in hell since his last film, which was Freddy's Dead, right? He's stuck in hell, and he's essentially has not been able to do his thing and killing the kids and things like that because he's stuck in hell. So he basically devises a plan to get Jason, who recently, if you remember, Jason goes to hell. He's also in hell. So he gets an idea to wake up Jason and go into Jason's dream and get him to come out, to wake back up and kill kids and somehow get it twisted, go back to Elm Street, get it twisted so that Jason would kill the kids, but somehow people would think it was Freddy. So that would give Freddy an in to then start feeding on the souls of the kids of Elm Street, because his whole thing is, oh my gosh, they forgot about me. And this was going to bring him back into the world. Does that not sound very convoluted? I think it sounds convoluted. I don't know. Now, I'm not going to say I could have come up with a better idea. But they could have come up with a better idea. It's very much an action film. It is not necessarily a horror film, if we're being honest. There's no real atmosphere in this movie, you know, especially for a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Let's show a little bit of a clip of this. And also, I went to the theater to see this one too, and I knew that I was in for not the best movie because of the opening dialogue of Freddy. That's when I knew there was gonna be a problem with this film. So let's show that for a second here. So, okay, we're getting kind of the overview of what happened. Fine, I guess if someone was born not in the time to watch the movie.
I was alive. I might have been a little naughty, but after they killed me, I became something much, much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of.
Okay, y'all. Does this not sound like a comic book villain opening to you? Like, why are we getting the rundown like this? He has broken the fourth wall. He is talking to us. And this is my great plan. Twirl. I mean, if he had one of those villain mustaches, he'd be twirling it. You get what I'm saying? And this was the beginning of the movie. When that came, the first thing I thought was, what in the world? Why is he telling me everything right now? Funny enough, another thing, and I don't know if we can judge the audience or all of us who just had the nostalgia. This came out in 2003, and it actually made $116 million in the box office. So it actually made it before the remake, 2010 remake came out. This was actually the top grossing Nightmare on Elm Street movie up until the 2010 movie, right? So once again, the movie did well. And I will say, I think it was, once again, opening weekend. People saw, Jason versus Freddy. They were thinking, oh my gosh, this is gonna be epic, just like Alien versus Predator. We know they were doing this a lot. We had Alien versus Predator. We had Jason versus Freddy. We had a couple of those kind of movies, right? Tyrannosaurus Rex versus the shark. I don't know, insert these movies here. So we had a lot of that. So I get why I was even amped for it. Once again, this was another movie I went to the theater to see. I'm starting to think I got duped twice. I went to the movie to see this one, and then I still showed up for the 2010 remake. The cons. The plot was weak. The plot of this film was just weak, y'all. It was weak. Freddy has been in and out of hell. I mean, how many times did he get sent to hell? He's always been sent to hell. At the end of every movie, he goes to hell. But somehow, I'm supposed to believe that this time, he needed Jason to come back. Now, mind you, even if I was to believe that, this isn't the first time that he's needed someone to go bring him souls. This is actually a rehashed plot line. Freddy's Dead did the same thing. It was the same sort of thing where Freddy didn't have any more souls. Just in Freddy's Dead, Springwood had become barren. In this one, Springwood was still around, but everyone had forgotten about him because they had pretty much sent everyone to an asylum who did remember him and put him on pills. So same kind of dynamic, just slightly tweaked. So this wasn't even an original idea, this 2003 thing of him needing to remind people about who he was. They took it from Freddy's Dead. Can you remember the names of the characters off the top of your head? I dare you. Don't look it up. Don't Google. Who are the teenagers besides Kelly Rowland? You can't name Kelly. Fun fact, do you even know Kelly's character's name in this movie? So now we're into the not great. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't horrible, but it just wasn't great. It's not great. It's all right. What do you guys think is going to be my not great pick? Dream Child. Damon, you got it right. It was Dream Child. Very perceptive. Yes. Dream Child, 1989. Not great. Nope, it wasn't Freddy's Dead. It was Dream Child. Dream Child to me was lower on the list than Freddy's Dead. For reasons. It was It's an movie, which is interesting because I'll get into that when I get to that movie, but it's an movie. You know, you don't remember much of it, except that some of the characters from the previous one were in it, but you don't remember much of it. There's like one iconic scene. I'll give it an A for a pretty interesting plot line. Not that he hasn't done this before, trying to possess somebody, but this was the first time he was trying to possess a kid. So, there was that. And so basically, the box office, which is interesting, this is probably one of the lowest performing Nightmare on Elm Streets. Fun fact. It basically had a budget of $8 million, but it only grossed $22 million. So, this is by far the least performing Nightmare on Elm Street in the franchise, funny enough. So this film did the worst out of all of them, money-wise. And some of the cons of this is that it's not the main thing. I keep saying it, but the main thing, that's why I don't even want to spend too much time on it, is that it just wasn't very memorable. Kudos to them for letting the black girl live in this one. The friend who we get introduced to in the first movie, in this movie, she actually gets to live. So the black girl lives. So yay. But she only had like one aspect with the pool scene. That was it. Then another part in this film was the whole thing with the guy who really loved comic books. That was sort of funny, but once again, didn't really land. I would argue that the best aspect of this film, I was actually trying to find a clip of it, but the best aspect of this film was when Freddy overfeeds one of the characters. He basically overfeeds her, and that was such a disgusting clip. That was such a disgusting scene that's probably the one that stands out the most to me from this film. And that's it. So, this is the okay territory, y'all. And that is Freddy's Dead. Freddy's Dead is okay, which I guess this is controversial because some of y'all thought that Freddy Dead should have been the worst one, or at least one of the worst ones, and I honestly don't think it's one of the worst ones. I actually really have come to enjoy this film for a number of reasons, but I actually really enjoyed Freddy's Dead for a number of reasons. It gets a bad rap, but it's actually a decent movie. The overview is that Freddy's Dead takes place pretty much 10 years after the original. And what has happened is that Springwood, Elm Street is basically abandoned. The only people left there are pretty much the adults and one young guy. And pretty much, just like I was just saying, that 2003 pretty much kind of took this plot line. Freddy has no more souls to feed off of because everyone's gone, right? And so he chooses one of the remaining kids or teenagers to send out into the world to draw people back into Elm Street so that he can get souls. That was basically the plot line. Now, in the midst of this, though, we have a great twist where we discover Freddy had a child, which I thought was a pretty good twist. And we also got flashbacks with Alice Cooper and others. We got flashbacks into Freddy's childhood and things and what made him like he was. And so I know there are some silly moments in there, like with Roseanne and stuff like that, where it's all like the kids are like, oh my God, like they're like, oh, a child and things like that. So it does seem kind of silly. And even the teacher in the school about Freddy, it seems kind of contrived and also unrealistic. Like, why would there be a town like that no one would notice from the outside? And I do think this is where the 2003 movie did it a little bit better, where it made it more realistic, where they made it so they made people forget about Freddy with pills and things like that, rather than, oh, he just killed all the kids and the town is just a wasteland of crazy adults for some reason. So it's a little weird, but it still made sense. And they did come up with the idea before Freddy versus Jason. Okay, so you had the box office of $34 million. They made pretty much $35 million against a budget of $10 million. And so this was actually hyped up, this movie, right? Freddy's Dead. It actually had a really good soundtrack. Freddy's Dead. Y'all like that? But the other thing that it had going for it was that, you know, because people had a feeling that Freddy was getting too comedic and things like that, they wanted to just say, this is the final Freddy, right? So they did a whole marketing campaign to kind of be like, don't you want to come see the final Freddy? And to make it so that it's his daughter, of all people, that puts him away, was I think a pretty good send-off. And had they ended it there, I probably would have been okay with that. You had good characters. I actually can remember a good amount of the characters in this movie, which I think is important when it comes to a horror movie. You don't need to love every character in a horror movie, but you definitely have to not forget about them or hate them completely. So in this sense, Freddy had good characters to play off of. And because the characters were distinctive, their death scenes were distinctive. And that's what you need too with a Freddy Krueger movie. Now, a slasher movie, you don't need people to be super distinctive because the slasher is just killing them, like whether it be by a hook. You just need the killer to be creative. But with a movie like with Nightmare on Elm Street, you kind of have to know the characters a little bit, because that's what makes how Freddy kills them more significant, right? It makes it so it's like, well, if this character's into this, Freddy creates a dream world like this. But if you don't know these characters, and Freddy's just killing them and creating things, you're like, oh, okay, I guess maybe that character didn't like that, you know? All right. You know, there's no kind of deception there. And so good Nightmare on Elm Street movies play on you knowing the characters well enough to then know how Freddy can get to them.
Me, be like me.
Father knows best.
And this makes sense because we know that Spencer has daddy issues.
I'm not like you. I don't want to be like you. Not like you.
Be like me. Now I'm playing with power.
All right. Super Spencer. Yeah.
Regret.
right? Now, it wasn't perfect, of course, because this is an okay movie, but I do want to point out this movie also had the awesome Yaphet Kotto, Doc. One of my fave characters of the franchise. Doc is one of my fave characters. I felt like it was also somewhat of an appeasement for people who were mad that Kincaid got killed in the fourth one. A black character, he made it in the third one, gets killed off in the fourth one, and then they bring Doc, and I was scared for Doc, and Doc knows about dreams and things like that, and he basically helps them, and Freddie and him go against each other, and he doesn't die. Doc doesn't die, and he's actually a very cool, badass character. So I think that is also a highlight of Freddy's Dead as well. Now, it has some cons, right? It's kind of silly at times, as people have pointed out. It is kind of silly at times. The whole Roseanne, Springwood thing made no sense. It was stupid. But everything else pretty much worked. This one is also kind of tied for the okay. And it is Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. All right. So, I feel like this is a somewhat polarizing film for people for a number of reasons. Yes, Josh with the what? I think this is a very polarizing film for some people. I think this is a gem with a lot of undertones. I think I did not come to appreciate this movie until I was older to understand what exactly was happening. This movie is some symbolic sort of, and even the creators of it even said it, that this is something of an undertone of a guy coming out in a way for himself. And not even like sexuality or anything, but just like who he is as a person coming into his own. And I think once I looked at it like that, yes, Jorge just says it bluntly, the gay one. This was the movie that very much had undertones of symbolism of this. What we get are some really interesting scenes and aspects. And it didn't do horribly in the box office, though. Funny enough, it did better in the box office than, it's probably like the second lowest grossing one. The lowest grossing one being Dream Child. And this was the second lowest grossing one. It had a budget of $3 million and it made the box office, it made $30 million in the box office. So it made, 10 times what it was worth. So it wasn't a loss, but it definitely didn't do as well as the first one, and it didn't do as well as any of the other ones after it, except for Dream Child. Dream Child did the worst with only $22 million. So what are the pros of this story? There's a double story going on here. This is a story that is dealing with a boy coming of age. It has one of the best dance scenes that I have seen in a horror movie. I can't show it because probably the music would get copyrighted. But when he's cleaning his room and Jesse says, "Take that, Dad," and he starts to dance and it shows him bopping his butt up against the drawer, I cackled and I thought, this is amazing. This is also a movie where, for whatever reason, he ends up in a gay bar. Randomly. I don't even know how he ends up outside in the rain. They never really explain if he's awake or asleep, but he ends up in a gay bar and he comes in contact with his gym teacher, who for whatever reason somehow makes him go to the gym, and he follows him and makes him run laps. Now, I don't know why the gym teacher is like allowed to do that, but it happens. And the gym teacher is in leather, and then he gets spanked to death. The gym teacher gets spanked to death. There's a lot to grapple with in this film. It is, but I want to say it's okay for what it tried to do. It was ambitious. to be the sequel of a really popular franchise and just do a complete 180 and not completely suck at it. I think it deserves its kudos. Right? And I actually want to show, now this is where the big con is for me. And this was why this is just okay. For a number of reasons too. The editing was horrible because there were certain cuts where it was just like, how did we get here? But my main con with this film is that it goes against the lore. I'm big on rules when it comes to lore and parameters, and this film did some weird stuff. Now, you could argue that Freddy got to come out into the real world because he came out through Jesse, but that doesn't make sense because how was he able to like fully come out through Jesse right then and there? I thought that was the whole point of the movie, to try to get to that point. And so we have the pool scene where this happens. So I'm going to show that. What? Get out of here! Get out of here!
Just calm down, right?
This guy, just calm down, man. It's going to be okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
We're all cool.
Just
calm down, my dude.
Nobody's going to hurt you.
Nobody's going to hurt you.
Just tell us what you want, all right?
Money?
Yeah, I'm here to help you.
So, fucker! You are all my children now.
But somehow I guess he's possessing Jesse's body at that moment. Still doesn't make no sense. We're getting to the good ones now, but it's not the best one. So which one do y'all think I'm going to say is a good one? 1988's Dream Master. It is Dream Master. The MTV Freddy. Yes, that's what they call they call it the MTV Freddy because it had a lot of great visuals. And I think the reason why this movie worked so well was because of the visuals. The script is lacking to a certain degree for a number of reasons. Mainly because during this time there was a writer's strike. So you had it so the actors were creating their own lines in certain scenes because they didn't have the rewrites and stuff with the script going on. So there was that happening as well. So this film really depends on the visuals, and rightly so, because the visuals in this film are pretty awesome. There's some really great visuals, really great special effects. Freddy is top notch in this film to a certain degree. Still has a sinister tone for the most part, but you get a lot more of, you know, that thing of who he is and stuff like that. And another fun fact is Wes Craven originally had an idea for the fourth film, but the studio rejected his idea. His idea was concerning time travel, and the studio turned it down because they felt like there was no way to do that and it didn't make any sense. So Wes Craven actually wanted to somehow take the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise into the time traveling direction. So that's the thing, but it didn't end up happening. We got the writer's strike, we had this, and it was very much probably one of the higher grossing films. It had a budget of $6.5 million and made $49.4 million at the box office. So it's basically the highest grossing Nightmare on Elm Street film until Freddy vs. Jason came out in 2003. So, and once again, it's a good film. It's good. It's a solid, good film, right? So you have some pros with this film. You have Freddy in top form. You have great visuals. Reason being because they had to rely more on the visuals than the script. I even like the visual of the Taekwondo karate thing when Alice's brother gets killed. It actually worked. I'm actually glad they ended up doing it that way, but they did it that way because they ran out of the budget. Isn't that funny? That whole scene came about because they ran out of the budget, and so they ended up just putting a whole bunch of blankets and stuff around, and created this scene and not even having Freddy in the scene. So, so that was just basically where they were with it. Also, it had a great final girl. We mentioned Alice in Dream Child. Now, Dream Child is a forgettable movie, but Alice really shines in Dream Master. This was another really interesting thing they add to the lore, where she is able to gain the powers of her friends when Freddy kills them. So you have the Dream Master and you have the evil dream guy, right? And so Alice becomes his opposite. And so you have this battle where Freddy gets the souls of her friends and the people, but Alice gets their powers. And so there's something really empowering about this story, because the way Alice begins in the movie is that she's very insecure. She's all up in her head. She's kind of a daydreamer. And by the end, she's really coming to her own. So it's a great growth story too, and really great characterization. And you had really good characters as well. Characters you could remember. Which I want to show my favorite kill scene. Can you guess what my favorite kill scene is going to be in this movie? This is actually my favorite kills. It's tied, but this is top notch, I think, this kill scene, just because of how impactful it kind of felt when they pop out of it. So, I mean, how creepy is this? This is great setup. No one notices what's happening. It's not a dirty boiler room where there's no one else around. This is a creepy thing that we all worry about in our dreams. You going through something and no one can hear you.
Wanna suck the face?
No.
Best part. Wanna suck face? You know what I mean? And and then she wakes up and that's happening. Totally connects. It just really works. So it just really works. The cons, of course, in this franchise, in this particular movie, are the dialogue. It's the dialogue because, well, there was a writer's strike. These people were making up their own lines on the spot. You know, so the dialogue's gonna not work. And my other one, and this is just basically a point of contention for me, because of the movie that's one of my faves, which is Dream Warriors, is that they didn't let anyone from Dream Warriors live in this movie. So Kristen dies in this one, Kincaid, Joey, the three that made it out of Dream Warriors basically get killed. And I wasn't a big fan of that. I kind of wondered why they had to do that. I understand why they kind of had to kill Kristen to kind of carry it over to Alice. But at the same time, I felt like we could have done without it, you know? So now we're getting into the very good. Not great, but very good. Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Now, this is a big change from when I first approached this franchise. When I first approached the franchise, I honestly had Dream Warriors as the best one. I know. Some of y'all are saying wow. Josh is saying wow. It's changed. Now, it's good. It's great. It's a good one. It's very good. I have very good. It's considered very good. It's not the great one for me now, though. Probably because, and maybe this might be subjective more than the objectively of the movie itself. It's very good. It's one of the best sequels of Freddy's, and Freddy's persona is probably the top notch for, my mom is saying Dream Warrior was good. Damn good. It really was. And you really just see Freddy's persona. But I've come to realize that although this movie is probably all around, overall, a top-notch, near-perfect Nightmare on Elm Street film, it's not the scariest. And I did have to start factoring in the scare factor. I wanted to factor in the scare factor with this one. And while it's probably, for me, one of the most empowering Nightmare on Elm Street because it's Dream Warriors, right? Up to this point, this was the first film where people kind of take their fates in their own hands. And it's such a kick-ass movie in that regard. And it has the action in it. And this is also a movie where you really get the dream. This is where it starts emerging, where Freddy takes the dreams of and the personalities of the people and plays on it more, right? You get more of that in this film. You get more of the play on the character and their personality and Freddy using it against them. And that is really good. These are all parts of the franchise that came to be the standard for the Nightmare on Elm Street, except for 2010, which kind of threw that out, wrongly so. So that is also really good. You know, the overview is that this movie is supposed to take place, I think, another one that takes place only a year or so after, a few years, like maybe 2 to 3 years after the original. And basically, it's another one where a lot of the Elm Street kids are basically in an insane asylum, which 2003 Freddy vs. Jason also borrowed from. And basically, they are kind of what's left of the Elm Street kids, just like kind of the 2003 one to a certain degree. And basically, Freddy's terrorizing them. And we get the return of Nancy in this film. This was also a great one. Heather Langenkamp comes back, and it is amazing. She is one of my favorite final girls, and she just did really a great job in this. And you had some really good characters. You had the return of her dad. A lot of this really, Nancy returns. A lot of this really worked, and they fought back, as you all were saying. They fought back, and I think that was what was so great about this film. And it was just a really well done script. And probably the reason for this is because this is the movie where Wes Craven came back to the franchise for a little bit, right? He made the first one originally. Fun fact: Wes Craven didn't originally want Nightmare on Elm Street to be a franchise. He kind of wanted it to be a one-time type movie, but, you know, of course, studios and money, and it made as much money as it did, so they turned it into a franchise. So he had nothing to do with Freddy's Revenge, and then he came back and helped with this one. This movie was going to be a lot darker than it turned out, right? In one of the scripts, here's some fun facts. In one of the scripts, it had Freddy being framed by Charles Manson. That was going to be in one of the scripts that they were thinking about, the studio was thinking about using, where Freddy wasn't actually guilty, but that it was Charles Manson who had framed him, and he got framed and killed, and so he took his revenge out on everybody else. And I gotta say, I'm actually very happy they didn't go that route, because who knows how it would have been shaping the franchise if Freddy would have been innocent all that time. So, yeah, there's that. But could you imagine he was framed by Charles Manson? Okay. Charles Manson just killing kids in schools. All right. And originally in this film, Joey and Kincaid were actually supposed to die. So it seems like Kristen was supposed to be the final girl solo. And I'm also glad they changed that and made it so that 3 of them made it out, at least out of the group. And it was, of course, supposed to be a way darker script. Also, the drug addict character, Taryn, was actually originally supposed to be an African-American girl. But they changed that for some reason. I guess, I don't know why. So, okay, yeah. And Jorge is saying 6 years later. It was 6 years after, right? So, you know, it was well done. And I gotta say, it's very good. The only reason why this is not my number 1 is because I felt like the other 2 that I'm going to name were, at the end of the day for me, better movies for the franchise. There's nothing really necessarily wrong with this film. It really is nothing wrong with it. It's just that these 2 that I want to name were better, in my opinion, for when it comes to the fear factor of things. Yes, this was an empowered movie. Yes, there were a few jump scares, but in terms of the atmosphere and really impacting you, I think the other 2 hit it out of the park a bit more. This is one of my favorite, it's my favorite one in the franchise, the Welcome to Primetime. And so, wanna...
Don't suppose anybody would like
And I think they just had some really distinct characters in this. I mean, once again, this is a character who wants to make it in the movies and stuff like that. But, you know, you had Jar Jar Gabar in this one, which was also great. And it was, again, an iconic line, iconic part.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big breaking TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
There you have it. All right. So now we're into the great, and then we're going to the best. So which one is the second one, do y'all think, out of the two that are left? New Nightmare. New Nightmare is the great one. And this may be also controversial because it was more meta than anything else, and people had some feelings about it being meta. But I think Freddy was probably at his scariest. Aside from the one I'm gonna name, which y'all probably have guessed already what that one is. But he had got back to his scariest. This was when Wes Craven was allowed to come back and really kind of do this character in a way that he had always kind of wanted to envision him, which was darker, which was sinister, more sinister. And this one is definitely up there in terms of Freddy really just being terrifying. He was scary in this movie. Doug is saying, my only issue is Freddy didn't show up until an hour and 8 minutes into the movie. And there's truth to that. He didn't show up till late. But I think that's because they were setting the tone. And this is what I mean about the atmosphere. There was so much going on in this film that was just creepy and scary that his presence, even though he wasn't physically there, you felt it. You felt some evil in the air. And that, to me, was masterful of what Wes Craven was able to do with that. So, New Nightmare was meta, and we love it. Fun fact, Wes Craven had actually pitched this storyline years before. I think from my understanding, he wanted this one to be the original sequel. That basically it would have been from the first movie that Freddy was now haunting the actors from the first movie. They didn't go for it, but he eventually got to do it now. And I'm kind of glad he was able to do it now after all the other ones, because I think the reason why it's better now is because you get to compare this Freddy, the real Freddy, to the movie Freddy, who, you know, rightfully so, as people have pointed out, rightfully so, got a little bit more overly comedic. And so when you have all that to compare and you finally get to this Freddy, who is this bigger, bulkier, scarier, more demonic-like, it really has more of an impact when you have all these other interpretations of him to compare it to. It only made $19.8 million at the box office with an $8 million budget, which is unfortunate because it's a really good movie. It's really scary. It's actually a really creepy film. And it goes to show what Freddy can symbolize more than Freddy as some sort of horror mascot, you know. And it's a shame because it did so poorly, you know. People kind of don't give it a chance, I feel like, you know, as much as it should be, or you know, kind of give it its props in being the way it is. And so and fortunately, Wes Craven would come to be part of another meta franchise just a few years later with Scream that he directed. Wes Craven directed the first 4 Scream movies and did a phenomenal job, and just kind of took a lot of these elements of who's in the house, what's going on. There's a sinister call on the phone that happens in this movie that you get in Scream later on. And it also took a meta look at the horror genre. So we got so this movie, New Nightmare, is a precursor to that, and rightfully so, in such an awesome, awesome way.
Miss me?
And you kind of also sort of see the Scream aspects of this, right? And so, y'all, now we got the number one, and I'm pretty sure you all guess what that one is. It's the originator. It's A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. I actually have the big poster up on my wall up here, which is funny. I have Dream Warriors too. I haven't put that on the wall yet, but it is Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm gonna say because it's probably the closest to the intent. You know, everything kind of works in the film. It ages well enough. I mean, yeah, there's some scenes in it that don't age as well in terms of effects. Like there's a scene where Freddy's arms come out in the alleyway, and it looks so fake. The way his arms are getting like extended, you can kind of tell the mechanic that's happening, but it's creepy. You know, when Tina dies and the aftermath of that, the whole running in the halls of Screw Your Past and things like that, it all just really, really works because it played on the origin, I should say, of our fears of dreaming, of a secret going on in a town that no one knows until it gets discovered by Nancy, who had no idea. The parents worked. All of this worked. It's not a perfect film, because none of these are. And I was going to do something really controversial and say New Nightmare was number one in a way, but I think Nancy was at her finest in this one, although I loved her in all the other ones as well. As you can see, my top three had Nancy in them because she is the Laurie Strode of Nightmare on Elm Street. She just is. And so the ones that have been the best are the ones that she's in. And it just really works. How she gains her strength in the end and just kind of turns her back on Freddie, you know, things like that. And so, you know, yeah, I agree. Nancy is the best final girl. No one knows. He walks through. So cheesy, but it works.
Visit next.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
That is the tier list, y'all, for Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Did you agree? Did you disagree? That's my tier list. I'm going to put it up here so y'all can see it. So basically, F tier, the worst of the worst, was Nightmare Remake 2010. Not so great, but still very bad, was Freddy vs. Jason 2003. D was Dream Child 1989 because it was somewhat forgettable. And then kind of tied, although Freddy's Dead edges out, or more so Freddy's Revenge edges out Freddy's Dead, was Freddy's Dead 1991 and Freddy's Revenge 1985. B was Dream Master 1988, tied for A with New Nightmare, somewhat edging out Dream Warriors. And then S tier, God tier, was the original 1984. Y'all like my little graphic? I'm trying, y'all. I did this media thing. This is my first time doing this on Twitch. Jorge is saying, outside of Freddy versus Jason being second to last. Josh is saying, swipe 1 and 3, and I mostly agree. That rhymed. You're a poet. You didn't know it. Yeah, that's my choices. This is really good. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so those are it. Let me know if you agree, comment. For those who, I'm going to be putting this up on the YouTube. So, let me know if you agree, comment, and, let me know your choices as well. But yeah, this was my thoughts. What y'all would put for number 1, or what you would think is the very worst one of the franchise, if you agree or disagree. I'd love to know. But either way, thank you for coming on this journey with me for the tier list of Nightmare on Elm Street.